Okay, hi everybody. It's lovely to see some new folks in the room. I haven't met yet, so welcome. Welcome to the fourth and final lecture in our summer series of talks. Hello to those of you who are joining us through Zoom and those of you who are joining us later through YouTube. A quick word about format. Braden will present his research in about 20 minutes. Then there will be a 20-minute period in which he will engage in conversation with somebody who knows his research field. In this case, the interlocutor is Andy Mushin, who is a CSRS graduate student fellow who gave his own lecture in the regular series a few months ago and did very well. After Andy and Braden talk for 20 minutes, I'll chair a discussion period for those of you who are in the room, but also those of you who are joining us through Zoom. Our speaker today is Braden Russell. Braden's a PhD student in the Department of Central, Eastern, and Northern European Studies at UBC. They're just missing Southern Europe. So that's basically everything except Italy. Okay.
Well, that's romance, right? Like romance languages.
Okay. So no offense, UBC. So Braden's a graduate student fellow with us at the moment. Before he started his PhD, he completed an MA in Germanic and Slavic Studies from the University of Victoria, an MA in Language and Culture at Texas Tech University, and a BA in Global Studies also from Texas Tech. He's with us while he works on his dissertation because he very innocently visited a mutual friend several months ago and showed up at one of our coffee talks. Any interesting person who walks into that room on a day when we don't already have a topic set becomes the official topic of that day. And it was a bit of a surprise for him, but he handled it extremely well. And really the conversation went so well that we were really thrilled later on when it became possible for him to spend some time with us writing in our offices on the island. His work addresses gender, sexuality, religion, and ethnicity in the German Jewish context. These issues have arisen in one way or another at the center in the last decade or so, but Braden brings them together in new and I think quite interesting ways. Before I turn the podium over to Braden, I want to acknowledge and respect the Songhees and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. So please join me in welcoming Braden.
For the introduction. So before I start, I would like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen peoples whose territory the university spans, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day, a place where I undertook my master's in Germanic and Slavic Studies and helped inspire my trajectory towards my PhD project. In addition, I would like to acknowledge and respect the traditional and ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam people, where the University of British Columbia Vancouver campus resides, and where most of my research and writing for my dissertation has taken and is taking place. I also want to offer my sincere thanks to Paul, Rachel, Scott, and Noriko, who have made my transition to the center possible and given me space to write and think through much of my dissertation project. I want to give a special thanks to Paige Toms and Christy Foster, who have offered their beautiful home while they are away, which has allowed me to be present and active in the center. I want to thank all of the fellows in the CSRS, both here and online. It has been a pleasure to hear everyone's interesting research and then be in conversation with many of you, which has made me think more critically about my dissertation project and research interests. I also want to give a special shout out to my colleagues and friends at UBC and elsewhere who have joined here and online and given so much support to my project. So let's begin. For my talk today, I want to describe the trajectory and content of my dissertation project. As Paul mentioned, I'm a Germanist in training, where most of my theoretical and methodological training lies in queer German literary and cultural studies. So I look at various cultural products for my dissertation project. For example, I look at novels, photography, stage productions, to get a glimpse of what it means to be queer and Jewish in present-day Germany. However, before I get into the cultural products I use for my dissertation, I want to discuss how I came to this research. The beginnings of this project began in the summer of 2017. I was taking part in a German Jewish studies program at Humboldt-Universität in Berlin. During this 2-month course, I learned about various topics and discourses in German Jewish studies from the Jewish Enlightenment period, both the historical and present-day Jewish environments and spaces in Berlin, and the history of Jews in East Germany. However, through my readings, the discussions in the seminars, and the trip excursions, I wondered about queer Jews, As the only queer Jewish person in the program, coming from an LGBTQ plus welcoming Jewish community in Texas, I wondered about the queer Jewish experience here in Germany. This led me to reach out and connect with a Jewish organization, Let's Start Davening, also known as LSD, an egalitarian Jewish community with Jews from various upbringings, denominations, countries, and places in their life. I joined for a Friday night Pride Shabbat in a dance hall in the district of Prenzlauer Berg, where we brought in Shabbat with singing while also discussing what it meant to be queer and Jewish. Some discussed not being part of synagogues, preferring egalitarian services. Others discussed being part of synagogues and more traditional communities. Others were rabbinic students. Some were just culturally Jewish, seeking community. A wide range of discussions erupted over rainbow challah and wine. We discussed anti-Semitism and philo-Semitism, Holocaust memory in Germany, which brought about a wide array of paths and directions that I found at this one Shabbat, showed me the complex and various ways Jews are negotiating their senses of belonging in post-Shoah and post-unified Germany. It was this Kabbalat Shabbat service that interested me in researching queer Jewish belonging in Germany. Later on in my studies at UVic and at UBC, I became more interested in how cultural products discuss the heavy terms of queerness, Jewishness, and Germanness. Literary and cultural products are sites to help explain, complicate, and move discussions on these terms forward. And this is where my research questions arise. How do cultural products from queer Jews or cultural products addressing queer Jewish experience or topics inform ideas of cultural belonging for queer Jews in Germany to both larger Jewish communities and non-Jewish communities? How do these products unearth the workings of anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and inform networks of intersectional cultural belonging and kinships? For today's talk, I will look at three cultural practitioners from my dissertation project. Olga Gryaznova, a novelist and essayist. She was born in Baku, Azerbaijan, and at the age of 11, her family fled Azerbaijan as contingent or quota refugees. Her debut novel, All Russians Love Birch Trees, addresses complicated notions of belonging in Germany as a refugee, as a Jew, and a person who does not fit into normative categories of identity. Sasha Mariana Salzman is a queer, non-binary Jewish writer and playwright whose debut novel, Beside Myself, was shortlisted for the German Book Prize in 2019. Born in Volgograd, Russia, and also a quota refugee, their novel approaches the topic of Jewishness from its queer protagonist, Ali Anton. As the reader charts intergenerational story and the search for the protagonist's twin brother in a rhizomatic fashion, the reader discovers the main character, Ali, is queer, while also discussing the topic of immigration, anti-Semitism, and intergenerational trauma. Similarly, their stage production, Meteorites, addresses queer community and the constellations of belonging between queers, Jews, Muslims, and Black Germans. Lastly, the Israeli-German photographer Benjamin Reich approaches photography with a focus on queerness, Jewishness, and Judaism in homoerotic fashions. Born in Bnei Brak in Israel, in a Haredi community, he left his traditional way of life after coming to terms with his sexuality as a gay man and moved to Paris to study photography, and currently lives in Berlin. His provocative photography installations also consider the ways third-generation Holocaust survivors negotiate a sense of belonging and kinship connections to Germany. Working with these various artistic mediums underscore how different aspects of culture are addressing similar topics in ways queer Jews and queer Judaism in Germany are being negotiated. To start, I want to first discuss the works of Benjamin Reich, and specifically certain pieces from his 3 published series titled Hala, Imagine, Dreams of the Third Generation, and Prayer for Orthodox Beauty. These photographs become a special type of launching point into discussion of queer Jewish expression and negotiation of queerness and Jewishness and Germanness. His most provocative collection, Imagine, Dreams of the Third Generation, discussed the German-Jewish dichotomy head-on. As Germany and Berlin have become both a hub for Israeli and other Jewish immigrants, the question arises of how Germany, the country responsible for the Holocaust, could be a new place of Jewish expression. His photo, Siegfried and Sarah 1, depicts this as a marriage between a Jewish woman named Sarah, and the model actually happens to be an Israeli cabaret singer, and a German man named Siegfried. However, the German model is provocatively dressed in an SS uniform. In an interview with the Jüdisches Forum, Reich mentions that the collection of photos in Imagine addresses ways that third-generation Holocaust survivors negotiate a sense of belonging and community building in Germany. He underscores how he has many Israeli and Jewish friends in Berlin, along with many German friends, and how each carries this type of history with them. And these photographs from Imagine deal with this kinship connection that are at times tumultuous and taboo. In other works, Reich addresses the topic of queerness and Jewishness, coming from and leaving a Haredi community in Israel. His photography addresses ways that Judaism and queerness are not contradictions, but rather interact with one another. The photograph, titled Untitled 2007, comes from a project Reich undertook in Israel at a mikveh where Orthodox men go to perform ritual bathing before the start of Shabbat. Reich mixes homoerotic elements in the ultra-Orthodox ritual site in the photograph. He asks the viewer to see how queerness and traditional elements of Jewish life intersect and are present. Similarly, the photo Abby Stein taken from the series Hala also depicts the line between queerness and traditional Jewish life. Abby Stein, a trans woman who left an ultra-Orthodox community in Williamsburg, is the first trans woman from a Hasidic community and is a direct descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, or the founder of Hasidic Judaism. Reich's portrayal of Stein becomes important in discussing queerness and its connections to Judaism. Being a trans woman rabbi and being posed with a tali in a sensual pose, Reich asks the viewer to see the direct links of traditional Judaism and queerness and sensuality. By playing with various histories and elements of Judaism and queerness, Reich unearths aspects of understanding queer Jewish experience in Germany and even beyond. Moreover, Olga Gryaznova, in her work All Russians Love Birch Trees, presents another opportunity to discuss queerness and Jewishness in Germany today. Published in 2012, the novel follows Masha, a young Russian Jewish quota refugee from Azerbaijan living in Germany. Struggling with her past, she has witnessed and fled the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in the early 1990s, while struggling to belong in present-day Germany. Masha is fluent in multiple languages, reflecting her complex identity. She speaks French, German, Russian, and Arabic. Her life takes a tragic turn when her boyfriend Elias dies unexpectedly from complications after he fractured his femur. As Masha grapples with her grief, she finds herself lost and disconnected, searching for meaning and belonging as a Jewish immigrant to Germany, and who is continually throughout the novel stereotyped by her peers about her Jewishness. At the same time as being stereotyped, she crafts an understanding of Jewishness and Judaism of her own. Masha's journey, moreover, takes her to Israel, where she hopes to find solace and answers. However, the trip only deepens her understandings of complexities of her heritage and the challenges of finding a home. Israel is also the location in the novel where Masha's Jewishness is always questioned, as she does not speak Hebrew and instead learned Arabic in university. As well as being a Jew from the former Soviet Union, she is stereotyped as a doubtful Jew in Israel, as Russian Jews experience forms of stereotypes and discrimination for not being Jewish enough. Masha never can fit in or fully belong to Jewish circles in Israel. Rather, she finds connections to her queer lover Tal, an Israeli communist activist fighting for Palestinian rights. However, Masha still feels like she has no belonging in Israel. In many ways, both the novel's plot and stylistic characteristics queers our understandings of the normative sense of Jewishness in Germany, and as well as Israel. I believe the novel forces the reader to think about Jewishness in Germany as, I believe the novel forces the reader to think about Jewishness in Germany queerly. Similarly, Sasha Marionette Salzman, and specifically their work, their novel Beside Myself, and their stage production Meteorites, helps me think through Jewish identity and belonging in Germany queerly as well. Beside myself follows the main character, Alyssa, who has always felt out of place, torn between her Russian roots and her life in Germany. Her journey takes a dramatic turn when her twin brother, Anton, goes missing in Istanbul. Determined to find him, Alyssa sets off for Turkey. And while in Istanbul, Alyssa searches for her brother and embarks on an inward journey. She uncovers family secrets and grapples with questions of gender, sexuality, and cultural identity and belonging. As the reader follows Ali's journey in Istanbul, as well as a journey through their family history, we as readers discover that Ali is in fact Anton, and that Ali is a queer or trans character. Their drama, Meteorites, depicts the struggle of a diverse group of characters from Berlin, identifying as Jewish Israeli, trans, Turkish, lesbian, and Black. Set during the World Cup in a time of national pride in Germany, these young characters struggle to fit into certain types of identities, while also forging radical kinship bonds between one another. The drama plays with and deconstructs identity categories through allusions to Ovid's Metamorphosis. The drama also allows for experimentation of different forms of kinship networks between various groups struggling to fit into larger German society whose experience various forms of oppression and discrimination. Moreover, the drama asks the audience to consider the malleability of identity labels and ways belonging and community building are forged, and offers radical potential against oppression and normative senses of belonging. Saltzman's writing and stagecraft tease out themes of queer embodiment with Jewish undertones, and also hope for radical utopic vision of community building in Germany. Through these various cultural products, we see negotiations and understandings of belonging of queer Jews in present-day Germany. These products intersect in various ways, such as Jewish identity at large, by reconciling Jewish rituals and traditions and thinking about the new ways Jewish culture is represented and created. They negotiate being German and Jewish in post-Holocaust Germany, a country that focuses on the Shoah as a crux of the Jewish experience. These works and artists grapple with queer desire, love, and embodiment, and how these intersect with Jewish and non-Jewish communities. They also offer different takes on Judaism and ways queer's normative senses of German Judaism and German senses of Jewishness. The work lastly offers opportunities and experimentations of new forms of creative kinship networks. While I've discussed the writers and the photographer who make up the brunt of my dissertation project, there are further cultural products that could open up doors to understanding queer Jews and queer Jewishness in Germany. One is the Jewish drag queen Nana Shevitz, originally from Florida, who is one of the founders of a Jewish drag cabaret scene in Berlin called Jews, 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 that was established in 2018. Taking on the persona of an elderly Jewish grandmother, Nana Shevitz and Jews, Jews, Jews troupe discuss in campy fashion Jewish traditions, holidays, and Jewish cultural figures. Quoted in the Jewish Independent, Nana says, quote, "Being Nana Shevitz allows for space to connect with my Judaism while also allowing me to rewrite Judaic tradition in a way that serves queer people. More importantly, her shows help describe a form of Judaism that in ways breaks the molds and charts new rituals and traditions and paths forward in rather queer fashions." Another interesting avenue is the exploration on the topic of queer Jews in Germany as one of community building and activism. Researching ways in which communal bonds and queer Jewish activism emerge could be a fruitful exploration. Could be a fruitful exploration on the topics of queer Jewish experience in Germany, as well as also in other locations. So thank you so much for listening and also offering me the chance to present my research. I'm excited about our discussion and questions.
So now we switch gears. So Andy is, I mentioned he's a graduate student fellow, so he's doing his MA in history, and he's looking at the Berry sisters, a Jewish, I was going to say trio, but duo. And so, but in addition to that expertise in the kind of the Jewish artistic performative world, he always asks the best questions at coffee. I think he has the crown for that for sure. So take it away. Not to put too much pressure on him.
No, thanks so much. Thank goodness I prepared. Well, great job. That was
Thank you so
really
much.
provocative and really interesting. I need a little bit of context first to really understand this. So I'm interested in the demographics. How many Jews are there in Germany now, and how large is the LGBTQ plus community in Germany?
So in Germany, I think the Jewish Agency estimates that the population of Jews in Germany is around 125,000 in the entire country. Germany, like the German government doesn't necessarily count Jews in census as for like historical reasons. I'm assuming because of the Shoah. And the estimate of population of queers and LGBTQ plus communities in Germany, I would say would be approximately 2% of the population. So it's still pretty rather small.
So a couple of thousand
Yeah.
people.
Mhm.
Okay. And to what extent are queer Jews in Germany involved in the Jewish community? And to what extent do you think they actually feel accepted?
That's a good question. I mean, the larger German Jewish community is mostly organized under the umbrella of the Central Committee of German Jews in Germany, and they do have initiatives to welcome LGBTQ Jews in synagogues. It's mostly up to the synagogue themselves on how welcoming they want to be and how traditional they really want to follow. But the Central Committee, which is really the governing body for Jewish religious institutions, does have like a welcoming statements for LGBT plus Jews.
Mhm.
In Berlin, there isn't a specific LGBTQ plus synagogue, but there are a couple organizations that do link up with synagogues to create egalitarian services rather than more traditional services in Germany, because the German Jewish community is much more conservative or Orthodox leaning rather than more reform or liberal. There are liberal and reform synagogues, but they still are in ways very traditional in some ways. They have, there's one liberal synagogue when I was there in 2017 that still had a mechitza, but they had an organ
Do you
playing.
want to explain what a mechitza is?
It's a dividing wall between for men to sit on one side and women to sit on the next side, which is very traditional and very common in Orthodox synagogues. But in a liberal synagogue with an organ, it's pretty uncommon. It's a bit paradoxical in some ways if you think about it. But yeah.
Mhm. What do you think queer German Jews want from the Jewish community? And how do you think the Jewish community in general views them and what they want?
I mean, I think queer Jews specifically would want to, like, they're always wanting to be welcomed in certain types of synagogues, but then again, these spaces are also very gendered and very ways harmful to queer experience, where especially if someone's queer or non-binary and they have a dividing like a separate seating, where do they sit and how do they fully belong? And it's like these many aspects that kind of shun queer Jewish experience and queer Jewish life that I think that queer Jews would want to be acknowledged and kind of brought into those circles. I mean, however, they've been building their own connections and groups, like creating their own egalitarian services, like the LSD. I think the branch isn't as active in Berlin anymore because of COVID, but they were the ones forming services, egalitarian style services that were a mix of Ashkenazic and Sephardic traditions that were going on outside of the synagogue. primarily. It was more in just random spaces in Berlin.
Mhm.
I mean, on the from the Central Committee of Jews in Germany, they would say that they were welcoming. But again, like it's all these kind of institutional and traditional barriers that kind of block queer Jewish participation.
Mhm.
So I think that's like the hurdle probably between these two groups. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
You mentioned one of the artists helps us, the artist in your talk, think of the experience of Jews in Germany queerly. And what do you mean by that?
Oh yeah, so I think that was Olga Nova's. So what I think, so Germany has a specific kind of understanding of what Judaism is and what Jewishness is, and that in Germany, for example, the crux and the main understanding of Jews in Germany is the Holocaust, when in fact their Jewish understanding, Jewish expression is much more diverse and much more broad compared, like, and isn't solely focused on the Shoah. It's a huge part, don't get me wrong. But what Olga Gryaznovan's work does is it actually shows that there are multiple understandings of what it means to be Jewish. And for example, the character Masha, while her grandmother was a Holocaust survivor and fled to Azerbaijan into the USSR, she herself never experienced being raised in a home surrounded by a Holocaust memorial culture or Holocaust memory culture that is so prevalent in Germany, while she experienced a different type of conflict, and that also mirrors Olga Gryaznovan's own upbringing as having fled Azerbaijan as well during this time, and witnessing violence and civil war and ethnic strife in Azerbaijan, specifically between Armenians and Azerbaijan individuals. So that's what I kind of meant by it kind of breaks this understanding, this normative sense of what is being Jewish in Germany, because Gryaznova also discusses in an interview that Germany views Jews in certain ways and certain traditions. I mean, I think it was in 2015, 2016, when the Spiegel in Germany put up German Jews return to Germany, or a headline, something very provocative, and it made an image of just two Hasidic Jews, like a cartoon of those, making that like the focal point of that's what Jewishness is, when in fact it's a lot more broad. And Germany historically just never had like a Hasidic tradition. That was something that was going on in Eastern Europe prior, and Germany itself had its own German Jewish tradition. So yeah, that's kind of what I mean, is that it forces, the novel really makes us think queerly about Jewishness and like break down these held convictions about what Jews and Judaism is.
So looking at the work of these three artists that you've chosen, are there common themes emerging?
Yeah, and it's the common thing. The common theme is the discussion of, because they're all third generation and writers and artists, where they're dealing with the Shoah or the Holocaust in a different trajectory than what the second generation did and what the first generation did, and how they grappled with that in much more provocative ways, and kind of destabilizing the what is the Vergangenheitsbewältigung, the coming to terms with the past in Germany is what that term means, as being the sole reason of understanding Jewishness and Judaism.
Can I just get you to reflect a little bit on your last two answers? Because on the one hand, you were saying, well, these artistic works help us think queerly about these about Jewish life in Germany. But when you're referring to them as third generation, you're referring to them as third generation
Holocaust survivors.
Right. So you're even doing it yourself,
Mhm.
because they're actually, because if we in Canada, if I say you're a third generation Canadian, I'm
Mhm.
referring to your immigration history,
Yeah.
not for how long you've been here since we took the land from Indigenous people or whatever you might feel guilty
Mhm.
about, right? Or terrible about. So there's a way in which it's difficult to avoid that framing,
No, exactly.
right? So because when you said they're third generation, I thought, well, where did they come from?
Mhm.
And then I thought, oh no, he means Holocaust.
Yeah. And I think that's something that they themselves reckon with
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Because they do in their works and they understand that they are third generation Holocaust survivors and
Yeah.
that they negotiate with that identity level. But they also are labeled in Germany, I think the term is post migrants. Like they left and like it's now after the migration experience that what do they do now? What are they? That they, and even the term like Olga Gryazna's work directly discusses how this term is problematic, like being a post-migrant, you never then are outside of that migrant label in Germany, which is a large discourse on who belongs in Germany, who doesn't belong in Germany, which is also goes back into the ideas of citizenship, and also relates back to histories of like the guest workers in Germany too. So
sorry, I just wanted to make sure, because there was such an interesting thing that happened there. I wanted to make sure we saw it.
Yeah, no.
And I'm glad you asked that, because as a Jew, I hear third generation Holocaust survivor, I go right to the definition you were thinking of. Yeah, that's sort of common. Well, you swung around to a term I've learned at the center, positionality. And so, and you began talking a bit about the fact that these artists are all immigrants and they've all settled in Germany. So how do you think that positionality impacts their work?
Yeah, and that's a really great question, because being migrants or being not born in Germany specifically places them again outside. Like you see multiple forms, I guess, in the works of Salzman and Gryaznova, where in Germany you are discriminated against because you are Russian or Eastern European, and that you weren't, that the name like Masha's name is always difficult to pronounce for Germans for some reason in the novel, or that she gets in ways orientalized, like very much like that she's an exotic foreigner, quote quote, in Germany, and so that being quote quote non-German, or like being Germans who have moved and settled to Germany, places them still at this point of like being outside of the German collective community. So that's something that they really discuss, specifically Gryaznova and Salzman. For Benjamin Reich, I think it's also, he doesn't specifically discuss his self as in those forms of understanding oppression per se, but I would still think that he would still feel a sense of otherness, also because he's an other in his home community and being from a more Hasidic, more traditional, ultra-Orthodox life, and then so always kind of feeling that way. And so I hope that kind of addresses some of the question.
Have any of these artists officially immigrated to Germany, or are they seeking it? They all have?
Yeah, they all have, yeah.
So they do, well, they feel a sense of belongingness, but okay, there's always this ongoing sense of being the other.
Right.
In several ways, actually.
Right. Because it's like this negotiation of between belonging and actual citizenship. So you can always, you have citizenship, but you don't necessarily fully belong. It's like that dichotomy that I think a lot of these artists are discussing and asking us to question these categories, right?
Yeah. these issues, these categories feel very contemporary. Yet, most of this art was created 8 to 12 years ago. So how does that artwork speak to today, and how are you finding a way to make, how are you thinking of this work? Is it current work? Is it historical work? Is it both?
Yeah, oh, that's a good question. I would have to say, I mean, I think it would have to be a little bit of both, because the works are, like specifically the novels, are pointing at migration, and specifically also the stage play is looking at the World Cup, is where it's set in the World Cup and national pride. So you're looking at like addressing like the quote unquote migration crisis that occurred in Europe in 2015, that these artists are witnessing and writing in. Also the specific historical time of like the 2008 financial crisis and the threat of the European Union crisis. And so those have all impacted their work. And so I would say in a way that if they're talking about the specific moments that were back in the early teens and mid-teens, but then also this discussion hasn't left Germany really either, because you have the war in Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, where you have another refugee crisis, and also those authors are former Soviet former USSR citizens, and so it's just so that also is kind of a connection that kind of bleeds into today and where their political positions are too. So I'd say it would have to be maybe a little bit of both. Like these, it seems to be pouring out, I think, into current day and discussions that are still going on in Germany.
I don't mean to make extra work for you, but do you think you're going to have to compare and contrast this work with brand new work, if there is any, asking these questions?
Yeah, maybe, perhaps. I hope that I won't have to discuss that with my supervisors, maybe, but
I'm new to academia. I don't know this stuff.
I mean, I think, well, Sasha Mariana Salzman, they do have a new novel out. I think it was just published 2 or 3 years ago, that do also kind of similar things what they did in the first novel. So that's something to also consider, and probably will have to address in my dissertation for sure. Yeah.
Okay. One sort of one more demographic question. Is there anything really distinctive about the queer Jewish community in Germany? Is it the relationship to the Holocaust, for instance, that would make it a unique community in Europe and the world? And are there any other differences?
I think it would be because it's so transnational. Like the largest queer Jewish community would be in Berlin, and then in Cologne, the second largest. And because it's just a diverse, like a small subset of population, it's very diverse. It's getting there's a large Israeli queer Jewish community. There's former Eastern European, like former USSR and Eastern European Jews that have immigrated and moved to Germany, or just there in transient ways. North American Jews, queer Jews in Berlin as well, have made their home in Berlin and in Germany as well. So I think just how transnational and how diverse it all really is kind of what makes it very, very unique, I think, in Germany, and how it's moving a German Jewishness in queer ways and queer passions, I think. So that's fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks very much, Andy. Now we have the broader conversation with those of you who are here, and those of you who are watching through Zoom. If you have questions, send them to Scott through the chat function, and then Scott will articulate your question to the group. Shoshana?
Okay, I have two questions and please pick just one. So the first one is on one of the Benjamin Reich photos, the Sarah and Siegfried. I'm just wondering like if you could share your own perspective or reading on it, because I don't really understand what his perspective is in setting up that photo. And then the second question is on the statistics that you gave just at the beginning of that exchange. First of all, amazing that you just know those off the top of your head.
Oh, I checked in like this morning before. I want to know some of these demographics.
Yeah, that was very impressive. But like, I'm just curious about the numbers, the statistic about the numbers of Jewish people in Germany. Like, is that self-reported? How do they go about? Because you said like, obviously the German government is not going to be counting its Jewish citizens. Good on them for not doing that. But like the Zentralrat, I'm very wary of them and their agenda.
Yeah.
Like I think they would not even consider me Jewish.
Yeah, me.
You know, they're kind of a German government body.
Yeah.
So I'm just wary, like, are they asking the Jewish people in Germany to like self-report to the Zentralrat? Is it people who belong to religious organizations, cultural organizations? Yeah, please pick one of those, or neither.
Yeah.
It's fine if you want to.
I will choose the second one, and then maybe we can chat about the first one. So the numbers that I know are linked with the Zentralrat, but also with the Jewish Agency, who defines it as like core Jewish community, which means that it's self-reporting. So whether that be that they're part of a community or not, but they self-identify as Jewish, that's how the core community is kind of calculated. But it also incorporates the generational and lineage part. So if your parents are like, if either one of your parents are Jewish, then they say that they have kids and it's estimated up into that as well, I believe. So that's how they kind of figure out these numbers. And then the numbers that I stated in the discussion were from the Jewish Agency. But I know that they receive most of their information and statistics from Jewish organizations in the countries that they're looking at. So
Thank you.
of course. No, thank you for your question.
So Scott? John O'Hara has a question. I'm wondering if Braden can discuss how queer and trans Jews are making space for themselves in religious spaces. How are groups like LSD integrating queer and trans life into religious Judaism?
Ooh, that's a good question. Thanks, John. He's a colleague from UBC. So in many ways, like, so there's the queer Jewish organization Keshet in Germany, or Keshet Deutschland, and they have connections with one synagogue, for example, I think Frankel Ufa synagogue in Kreuzberg, and they work with that synagogue to create egalitarian services that welcome queer Jewish people, as well as alternative and kind of different forms of Jewish practice. That's one way, but then the LSD is much more egalitarian, where you don't need a synagogue. It's more basing it on community and culture rather than religious experience, like specifically focusing on the religious, but there's an aspect of that, but it's much more like cultural gathering, more almost in a sense Jewish renewal in its trajectory with Jewish religious doctrines, I would say, which are more welcoming to queer Jewish experience and queer Jewish life. I hope that answers it, John.
Thank you for your discussion. It's very enlightening. I wanted to know more about your research methods because, like, once, how are you analyzing, and that ties to Shoshana's question that how you're like, let's say, analyzing the photographs, or how are you interpreting these texts? These are like novels and also right? So, what's your methodology for doing that? Are you like having a one approach where you have one like a lens that you're looking through all these different let's say the medias, right?
Yeah.
So I'm more interested in that.
Thank you for the question. So mostly so as cultural studies and literary studies, I'm using more like queer theory, specifically queer and critical theory are my main focuses. I'm using kind of concepts from Sarah Ahmed and queer phenomenology in ways to help frame and analyze queer Jewish experience, specifically in the novels. And for the photographs, it's more in line with the queer theorists like Jack Halberstam, and using their theory to kind of give me a framework to help analyze those specific photographs. It's still a work in progress with the photography for sure, and just because I'm and like there's sometimes too much theory, right? Where I'm just having to figure out and make sure that my frame makes sense across the board, which has been the fun struggle of the dissertation with multiple forms and mediums. So yeah, thank you so much.
Could I piggyback on Amina's question? Because it's, I think it's good in these kinds of contexts to have a kind of a nerdy methodology question or two or three. So my second question on methodology would be, did you begin with an interest in queer Jewish life in Germany and then seek a method, like say, well, should I look through ethnography, sociology, political theory, or cultural studies? Like, did you do it that way? Because I'm wondering what you imagine might be different if you had looked through ethnographic methods, if you had actually hung out in German synagogues or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both, because when I was in Germany and kind of the anecdote at the beginning of my time there in those queer Jewish communities, I was doing my MA in language and culture, which is focused primarily on literary and cultural studies. And then just continuing on, and I just can't get out of literary and cultural studies because I just like it too much. So in that way, it was a kind of a mix of both, like thinking about, oh, I could do an ethnographic study, but realizing that my degrees that I continued on are more cultural studies based, made me kind of think about the theory later, but also in the back of my head having, oh, you could do an ethnographic study here.
And then you went looking for the texts to be your access points.
Yeah, and I thank my supervisors for offering so much advice and giving me all the opportunities to read the text and everything. So for the theory, so
Right.
I have so many questions, but I'm gonna squish it and maybe jump on a coffee with you, Shoshana, later. Second question depends on the answer to the first question. So it's a very one sentence. It's a very one sentence answer to the first question. Do you think is the focus that you're looking at in this piece the idea of queer acceptance and community and finding for Jewish people in Germany amongst queer community, or specifically finding community within Jewish community?
it's kind of a mix of both, I would say, but I would probably lean more towards the Jewish community or a larger community.
And then in keeping with that decided the second question, which was looking at the lovely hosted talk that was had here back in February with Lynn Marie Tonstad, who did a talk very unsubtly titled "Queerness Isn't Inclusive and Church Shouldn't Be Either." So that, keeping in mind that idea of one thing that she spoke about a lot was the idea that queer people have always existed within the church. So acceptance or no acceptance or space there is sort of guaranteed one way or the other, just simply by choosing to be present. So in looking for that, is it then about creating a separate and or kind of inclusive space for queer Jewish folk within the Jewish community? And it's looking at, like, is it more about having a secular acceptance, having a space in church, creating a different space of like non-synagogue synagogue to be like, this is where we are, come to us if you want to, or being able to go in and say, we're here, how do we fit in a way that makes us feel like a part of things?
Oh, that's a really good question. Thank you for that. And it makes me think more about, I think, because the synagogue culture and kind of ways the synagogue works is a bit more, I would say, regimented in ways, right? Like you have like the dividing, like in some synagogues, in more traditional synagogues, you have like division of seats between men and women. You have some women aren't allowed to go up and in traditional synagogues to go up and read from the Torah. So it's always like this struggle as well with how regimented it is. Sorry, words are very hard today. But then thinking about that, it's getting acceptance into Jewish spaces and being acknowledged as Jewish, I think is important. Because there's always these held notions, especially in Germany, about what a Jew is and what a Jew isn't. And it's normally cast on by non-Jews as well. So that also kind of complicates this dynamic as well within your question too. And in a way, just as the queer Jewish community is also carving out their own kind of own spaces, right? Just as you mentioned, outside the synagogue, but also in ways in the synagogue, especially with like the Frankel Ufa synagogues. So I'd say it's like a bit of both in some ways in Germany right now. I hope that answered some of the question, or it just opened up more.
Yes, I tend to make things more difficult.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
So we have Devyani and Scott, then Brian.
Hi, really liked your presentation, Braden. So I was wondering, drawing on your cultural and literary studies expertise, how much visibility is there of queer German Jews in German media or pop culture? And that made you take these 3 pieces of literary studies. And the other question we can have discuss over lunch on blog.
Perfect. So the representations of queer Jews in media is, I would say, pretty low. I mean, other than these 3 texts, which have made mostly just the literary markets, like made waves in that way, as well as in photography. But I would say like it's pretty low visibility of queer Jews in Germany. I mean, if anybody knows of any, please speak up. Yeah, because I might be having a.
It's an opposite answer and I don't want to derail you. So
Oh.
maybe finish.
Okay, but then, but I know in Germany, like, yeah, I'm gonna just stop there, that it's very low, or not present for a queer sense of Jewishness to be represented, like in pop media, pretty low, other than, I mean, unless they watch like certain Netflix shows, like certain Netflix documentaries that discuss like Jewishness and queer relationship in El Dorado, the Netflix documentary that just came out about queer life in Berlin. But I would say it would be very minimal, if anything.
Shoshana, did you want to add something?
Yeah, did you want to
before we go,
add,
Scott?
please?
It's a horrible example that like, there's this comedian who has been invited to Germany as like kind of he was invited to speak about anti-Semitism in Germany, and he's like a queer comedian and he's not Jewish, but he goes around, he's Zionist, he's like a queer Zionist comedian who goes around wearing a Magen David. So like he goes around wearing a Star of David, and Germany has appointed him as to be a speaker on anti-Semitism. He's not Jewish.
Oh.
But that guy comes to mind. His name is Daniel Spalding something.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Pretty
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
not surprising at all.
Yeah.
Okay, Scott and then Brian.
Robin Mazumder writes, when I was in Germany for my postdoc on urban design and well-being, I tried to advocate for an intersectional lens on the work, but there was no language in the academic forum to talk about race. The closest term was migrant. Is this related to the issues of being queer and recognized in Germany?
Yes.
Good question.
That's a really good question. Yes, I would say that there's like the lack of language, and I think it's just now that Germany is really kind of reckoning with the language, and specifically for trans Germans and how that they are defined or like expressed in language just in general, because the German language is so gendered specifically, and also that they their understanding of the word gender is they don't have a word. It's Geschlecht, which means also sex, which is different from gender, right? So the German language just didn't have linguistically that division. It's only now that only in recent 10, 15 years, Shoshana, if you
I don't know.
okay. Yeah, that like gender studies in Germany has actually become more of a topic in discussion in Germany. Yeah.
Brian, I think.
Well, as always, thank you for interesting and deep. So when you look at the artists you've chosen, presumably they had a decision to make as to where they could go. Have they talked about why Germany? Why did they choose Germany? And then related to that is their own journey of identity. Has it kind of been formative development being Jewish and queer in Germany, as opposed to a fixed identity before they went there, being clearly, I'm Jewish, I'm queer. So I'm interested in just that kind of that kind of mix, and how the being in Germany really fosters or promotes or inhibits that kind of identity growth.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So specifically, so these artists, so Benjamin Reich had the ability to move to Germany kind of more freely than I would say Ove Nova and Sasha Marianne Salzman, because the two writers, they were children whenever they immigrated to Germany through a specific German immigration pathway. They were quota refugees. So it was a specific pathway that was established in 1991 in Germany until 2005 that allowed former Soviet Jews to move to Germany specifically. They were able to create the quota and the criteria to bring in those individuals and those refugees or through their government, and also in kind of works with the UN refugee body as well. Sorry. And then so it granted them an easier pathway to get
Or their
residency,
parents.
or
from
their
what
parents,
you're-
yeah.
Right.
Because Olga Gryazhnova was 11, I believe. Sasha Marianne Salzman was also either the same age or a little bit younger, or in that time period. So, and specifically, they were able to immigrate because they had the documents on their passports that said Hebrew, because in Russian means Jewish. And so which is ironic because it's through the patronymic line rather than the matronymic line that they approved it through on both cases. But so then being in Germany, I think as migrants that still were ostracized for being Russian, for being, in a ways, also being ostracized, but also fetishized for being Jewish in Germany, impacted their identity as well. Not being German, like L1 or first language speakers, but having Russian as their first language as well, also kind of creates these negotiations between identities. Specifically, this becomes a huge theme in both the novels where Russian and German are kind of negotiated between one another to understand the characters' own identities. So I think that also can help us really understand how the authors themselves are negotiating their sense of identities through language as well. I think that's one example. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much. That was great.